Had some audio problems. Mike is not wanting to connect to our OBS system, so hopefully we can get that worked out. But we are moving forward in Matthew chapter 5. We have discussed the important factors or important principles that the Beatitudes are going to have on personal relationships, and that Jesus discusses how that if you know that a brother or a sister, for that matter, has aught against you, that you're needing to leave your gift at the altar and go and be reconciled to whoever it is that you have aught with. And we've been discussing this from the standpoint of how that these principles, or not even just these principles, but even these laws that are being given to us, have a deeper reach than what many people would want to have them to reach toward. And the reason for that is because individuals have an issue with authority. We're not wanting to have God dictating in every little facet of our lives, so therefore we start looking at passages from a standpoint of isolating them from other passages and other things that the Bible actually teaches. So the same thing is going to apply with what Jesus is going to lead into in the very next relationship that's discussed. That what's being presented with your brethren is then also going to find its application at home. So what is the next topic that Jesus addresses? Or should I say, what relationship? Jesus then leads into a discussion of marriage, and he discusses marriage before he even discusses the topic of divorce. The reason for that is because if you have a couple and they are in a marriage that's being guided by the Beatitudes, then what about divorce? You wouldn't have to teach about divorce. So what's being presented, these Beatitudes, they not only help our relationship with God, my relationship with God, but these Beatitudes are designed so as to help our relationships with one another. And taking a step further, that the Beatitudes also are going to help with the closest relationship that we have, and that between father and a mother. Now, even as we're moving into this topic of, or this discussion about marriage, the previous Beatitude still has application. So Jesus is discussing, you're bringing your gift to the altar, and there you remember that your brother has aught with you. Well, what if you get to the altar and you're going to give your gift, and then you remember, well, me and my wife had a fight? Doesn't that find the same application? What if you get to the altar to give your sacrifice and you remember, oh yeah, me and my spouse are at odds with one another? The same thing would be an application. You need to leave your gift, go back and be reconciled to your spouse, then come and offer your gift. Now, this is an important topic to discuss because we've already brought it up, and just how far this information goes, just how involved in people's lives are these doctrines, are these teachings, is the gospel, salt and light, going to penetrate and infiltrate all the way down into your marriage. So even with this, taking it a step further, even though this isn't brought up in the context, what about, so we're talking about husband and wife relationship, what about children with their parents? A father or mother gets to the altar and they remember, you know what, I've actually done wrong against my child. Paul would write to the Ephesian brethren on what, let me just ask you, what does Paul say about the relationship between parents and their children? Specifically, it's in the context of fathers. Fathers, what are you not supposed to do? All right, provoke them to anger, provoke them to wrath. So what if a father gets to the altar and remembers, well, you know what? Me and my son or me and my daughter ended up doing this, and now we're not on speaking terms. It finds the same type of application, that you're needing to go back and reconcile and be brought back together. So all of this is being promoted and being used towards the further production of unity. Unity between brethren, unity in the home, which ultimately is going to lead towards unity inside of the kingdom. So Beatitudes will preserve these relationships. My relationship with family, members of the church, and for that matter, even with my spouse. Now, as we said, the ultimate aim of this is that Jesus is proving how that the Pharisees, Sadducees, the Jews of this day, they're teaching, but they're not doing. And the way that they get around by doing that is they elevate certain passages against others. They are trying to set limits. Well, here's the measure of what you need to meet. Earlier, it was thou shalt not kill. Jesus said, that's true, but you're also not needing to be angry. All right, here's the other element. Here's what they're doing. Ye have heard that it was said by them of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery. All right, one of the 10 commandments. But I say unto you, that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. And if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out, and cast it from thee, for it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. And if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off, and cast it from thee, for it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. So once again, we have condemnation being brought into the discussion. Twice, Jesus makes the statement that you will be cast into hell for what's being discussed, to break this. So, with what is being presented here, what is the answer to marriage problems? It is a righteousness that exceeds. It is a righteousness that goes beyond what the measure is being set by those that are around us. Here's what the measure is. Don't touch, but you can look. No, that's not what's being presented. To look, and to look with a covetousness, a lusting in your heart, is going to condemn you just as much as you following through with the act. Because this is what starts it. This right here sets the groundwork for you to then get into this action. And thus Jesus is here illustrating the importance of this relationship and just how important this factor is. The very example, and of course he's not being literal, but he's showing the extreme nature of it. If thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out, and to cast it from you. I mean, that's serious business. Anybody just want to give up their right eye? No. And in fact, these are the types of things that if we really sit down and if we've just gone about our day and we were to think about it, just all of a sudden, if you were to lose your eyesight, that'd be frightening. To then have to try to figure out, okay, how am I going to go about my normal routine if I were to lose my eyesight? Or even keeping your eyesight, but you lost your hearing. And just not being able to hear people talk anymore, not being able to hear music. Just how awful, well, I say awful, but just how, awful would be the correct term, how difficult that would be. And Jesus is saying, yeah, but this would be far better than to be continuing on with this and end up losing your soul because of it. So in marriage, just as in the other relationship with my brethren, or in Christianity in general, in my marriage, I do not set measures as to, well, here's what's acceptable, here's not what's acceptable. And later on, we're going to see further as to what exactly is going on with the Jewish system as to why they're allowing themselves to set these measures and to set these limits. Because when we're thinking about the marriage relationship, is that just a light decision to make? Is that just a casual decision? Hey, I think I'll just up and get married today. Not according to how the Bible presents it. The Bible presents it as being you are coming into covenant. You are entering into contract with one another. And you are making certain pledges and you're making certain vows. You are swearing certain things that you have the responsibility to uphold. Well, guess what? A righteousness that exceeds and goes beyond does not set the measure of, well, I will uphold my end if you uphold yours. That's not what marriage is. Marriage is me saying, I'm going to do this even if you are not fulfilling your responsibility. And it's that type of attitude that keeps a marriage together, not this. And too many times, marriages are like that. It's a constant negotiation. Well, I'll do this for you if you do this for me. No, you should just do it for me. And it's that type of attitude that we have being presented that, like we're looking at Christianity. Christianity, a Christian is to go beyond. There's supposed to be an abundance of these things, all right? That is to go down even into this marriage relationship. There is an abundance, a far-reaching effect as to how far and how much effort that I am willing to put in. That I go above and beyond, that there is, so I already mentioned that, so that I will follow these teachings in the Beatitudes in my marriage. Just the same as the issue of murder. As we said, that's not all that is required. There's a wider application to where when you are considering the relationship between husband and wife, we are saying that we are separating ourselves from everybody else. I'm yours, you're mine, but I'm going to continue to look around for somebody else. That's what society does today. So when things start getting ugly in the relationship, in the marriage, what do they start doing? They start letting their eyes wander. Then that leads into this area of committing adultery. But Jesus addresses it from the start and says, no, you need to be realizing what this relationship is from the start. This is the only one that you have. So if you go into it with this mindset of, okay, this is the only one that I have, then what about the looking around? There's nowhere else for me to look to. It's the idea of, this is the only one that I have, so how should I treat it? If you've only got one shirt, you're going to take care of that one shirt. If that's all that you can afford, that's all that you've got, then that's going to be the one shirt that's carrying me through. Then you're going to take care of it. Same thing with marriage. God said this is the only one that you've got. So take care of it. Even down to what you're allowing your eyes to set upon, and even right here when it comes to lusting and coveting after. As we've said, with every temptation, with every sin, selfishness is at the core of it. And that's what's being presented right here. What is it that breaks marriages apart? Selfishness. Because, so even with Christianity, what has people give up on Christianity? Selfishness. The very basic foundation of Christianity is that I'm denying self. That's the same thing with marriage. I'm entering into this relationship not thinking about how that I can be gained, but it's how I can help the other person. And that's what Christianity is too. We're coming in to be servants. The greatest in the kingdom are going to be those that serve. All right? You want your marriage to be great? Serve each other. In sickness and in health. Richer or poor. And whatever the other lines are. Till death do us part. And it really is that death till us part section that people are beginning to neglect. Oh, they say it, but they don't mean it. Thus, we're not going to get into it today, but just getting you ready so our brains will already be in gear. That's the reason why Jesus brings up the issue of swearing, making vows in the next section. How convenient that he finishes talking about marriage And then he talks about vows. Keep your word. Well, yeah, that's what you need to do here. So all of this is bleeding in to the other topics. They're all connected. They're all related and bringing about this application. So when we're considering, we're thinking about what it is that brings these things crashing down is the fact that I allow these desires, self, to get in the way, and then allowing myself to lust and to covet after things that I'm not supposed to be coveting after. So this goes farther than just being unfaithful. Goes farther than just actually going out and committing the act. It's an attitude. And thus, we're right back in our earlier sections about the Beatitudes. It's an attitude toward impurity. If we have the first three Beatitudes, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are they that mourn, and we have that proper mindset about, well, how bad sin actually is, then what about this area when we're thinking about our marriage and the things that can be allowed to come into it and allow it to come crumbling down? I'm not going to allow those things to happen. The right attitude towards sin and impurity will protect a marriage. You will not find a marriage that is crumbling when both people have the Beatitudes working in their lives. That we are striving for purity. That we are hungering and thirsting after righteousness. And that is really where it starts. Where everybody needs to start. And especially when it comes down to what's being presented about looking, not guarding the eyes. And allowing things to come in, letting the impure enter in through our eyes, and thus taking root there. Taking solace there. And allowing them to find reservation. And we end up losing this attentiveness to the seriousness of sin. So just the idea that you're not looking on another. And even with this, oftentimes what produces problems inside of a marriage is not even looking, on the standpoint of looking so as to have somebody, but then we get into the business of comparing. Well, Jenny's husband does this. Oh yeah, well, Jerry's wife does this. And when you start looking into the affairs of others and you start trying to make these ill comparisons, that can end up producing problems within the marriage relationship. To where it just simply needs to be, are we following what God has said? Then yeah. And if we're following what God has said, then let's be satisfied in that. And let's not start looking over other people's fences, because that's what they say, the grass is always greener on the other side. Well, guess what? You think that, and then you end up hopping the fence into your neighbor's yard, and what do you start realizing? Not as green as I thought it was. The next hill always looks better. And then you get over there to that other hill and you look back at where you were, and it's just like, wow, look at how good that hill was. But instead, to recognize the gift and the blessing that you have. And as we said, if both parties are engaged in this, they won't go looking for an escape hatch or for a way out. What the Proverbs has to say about a contentious woman, those things won't be here. To where the husband would be trying to find a way so as to get out. If the husband is following and keeping up his responsibilities to fulfill his responsibilities to his wife, to his home, and providing and protecting, then guess what? The wife won't have any reason to look for anybody else to fulfill these things, because they are, in fact, all going to be fulfilled. But when we're considering, here's what they're doing. You've heard it was said of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery. And then Jesus brings it into the idea, thou shalt not look on a woman to lust after her. Here's what the Pharisees are actually doing, and it's the same thing that's going on today. What else is written in the Ten Commandments? We have this section here about not committing adultery. And went too far. And then in the same line of commandments, there's actually something else, well, pretty much what Jesus had already said is mentioned in the Ten Commandments also. Right after he discusses, or right after God writes down, thou shalt not commit adultery. Yeah?
Cover your neighbor's wife.
Okay, there you go. In Exodus 24, or 20, verse 14 and 15, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal. It's the same thing. You're stealing your neighbor's wife. But then you drop down to verse 17 and look at what else God mentions. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. So right here, in the same breath, in the same line of the Ten Commandments, is mentioning about coveting your neighbor's wife. Just 3 verses down, and you have it being mentioned that you're not supposed to covet after this. But this is what people will do. And we have been seeing it with a lot of our Bible studies that we've been having with folk. They will isolate verses from each other. I mean, can you imagine a person saying to you, thou shalt not commit adultery, but if you want to look after somebody else, lust after, covet after, that's fine. She's like, how can you say that? It's right here. But how do people do that today? Thinking about context and trying to isolate verses. John 3:16. But what do you have being mentioned? What was it, verse 21 or 22? So 5 or 6 verses down. You have Jesus and his disciples out baptizing. John is also out baptizing. But they want to try to isolate that verse from everything else and say, well, see, baptism's not there. Keep reading. They do this so that they can try to ignore what these teachings say, as if they're not actually connected, and then people will try to quibble. Well, I'm not coveting after someone's wife. That's what the verse says. It does not. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. All right, so I'm not doing that because I'm not coveting after some neighbor's wife, or my neighbor's wife is just some stranger. Well, the Proverbs addresses that. What about the strange woman? And even in that context, the strange woman is describing any woman that doesn't belong to you. Any woman that does not belong to me is a strange woman. You don't do that. But this is what people will do. Yeah. Don't go near the corner where you find her standing. Women that have this reputation, and that's the situation with Proverbs chapter 7, she has a reputation of not staying where she's supposed to. You don't even go towards it. You know that it's there, stay away from it. Paul would say in 2 Timothy 2:22, you flee from youthful lust. You don't go running towards it because you're trying to protect yourself. Now, people do this, and why will they do this? I mean, just consider, why would the Jews have a desire to teach the law this way? Do I know? Okay. It's wiggle room. It makes it more relaxing. Huh? All right, explain it away. It makes it more appealing to the masses. You just think about the job that we have set before us in trying to convert people, and how many of them are going to be in bad marriages. And in order for them to repent, if they're living in adultery, they're going to have to come out of it. You know what makes it easier for them to come over? You don't teach these topics the way that they're laid out. You make excuses. You try to isolate things. You try to explain things away. And we've had that going on even inside of the Lord's church for a long time. I know you're familiar with the Bales doctrine just because I've mentioned it. Do two of you familiar with Bales doctrine on marriage, divorce, and remarriage? Okay. Well, James Bales was a faithful member of the Lord's church, gospel preacher. But then he ended up teaching from Matthew chapter 5, Matthew chapter 19, that what Jesus is teaching on marriage, divorce, and remarriage applies to Christians only. So that a person out in the world, they're not applicable to that. They can be baptized, and the baptism takes care of their bad marriage. It's the exact same thing. Why would he start doing that? Well, we know why he started doing it, because his daughter actually ended up living in adultery. So he started trying to find a way to excuse it. Jerry Falwell, before he died, was actually quoted in the paper in Lynchburg, Virginia, where he actually says that the church needs to start changing its mentality and its teaching on the marriage, divorce, and remarriage topic, because at the time, over 50% of marriages ended in divorce. So since you have so many people that are going to be caught up in this issue, what do we have to start trying to do if we're going to? So even then, the very idea that we're trying to convert people, which is them changing, but we're actually setting it up to where they don't have to change, we're the ones changing. That's a big problem. But just as we said, it's more appealing to the masses. You can bring more people in. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's...
bank robber gets baptized or
right. Yeah. Or if not continuing to bank rob, you can keep the money that you stole. You don't have to give it back. But yeah, it just, it completely undermines the whole idea of repentance. And even then, like we discussed in our evangelism class, where we went through that article by Wes McAdams, and how that we do not push Christian ethics on people that are in the world, and how he tried to use 1 Corinthians chapter 5 for that. Who are we to judge the world? They'll be judged of God. That's the same type of mentality. Well, here's the world, and they've got all of these problems in their life, and instead of teaching them about the problems in their lives, they just say, well, we'll ignore that. We'll ignore this responsibility that you have to actually be converted and to repent and to ask for forgiveness of these things, and we'll just bring you in. Now, ultimately, when you're thinking about how things end up being taught this way, we're looking at it from the standpoint of those that will be coming in, so as to make it easier for them to come in. But really, who this is for, it's for the ones that are in power. The reason why the Pharisees are teaching this way is because they want to be able to do this. They want to be able to swap out their wife, change their wives like they change shirts. And so they allow this area to have them do this. And guess what? They are the elitists. Now, can't we see that going on in our society today? The ones in power are constantly making rules for everybody else, but then they have another set of rules for themselves. To where they would say to those that are underneath them, no, you've got this wife, you need to keep them. But whereas for me, as being in power, well, here's how I'm going to teach it. And not even realizing, well, I'm sure they realize the great damage that they are actually doing to the entire system, and thus the problems that we're even facing today. The reason why a large portion of our country is in debt is because of the welfare system. Which is what? Which is our country saying, yeah, if you want to get a no-fault divorce, get a no-fault divorce. You're no longer happy with the person that you say that you're going to spend the rest of your life with, and that you were going to start a family with, and now you have started this family, and you want to back out on your responsibility to your family? Our society has said, okay, fine, do that. Where we now have a whole host within our society that they are realizing, okay, I can be single, bring children into the world, and the government will help me to take care of my children. But when they say the government is helping them take care of their children, who's really helping them take care of their children? It's us that are paying the taxes. And even inside Judaism, with this type of situation going on, it's breaking down the system. It's creating a burden that is not needing to be there. What fixes all of this to where we would not look at this verse and then ignore what's being said here? It's a hungering and thirsting after righteousness. It is having that righteousness which exceeds, that goes beyond, to realize, okay, these things are in fact connected. That it is this that ends up leading me to this. And that by me entering into this marriage, I am saying that in fact I am going to control myself. And then even so, again, looking at verses 29 and 30, all right, so hold on a second. I had some things here in my notes. We already mentioned how that, okay, this is how desperate people are to loosen what God said. Okay. So yeah, looking at it from the standpoint as to, why do so many people stay away from Christianity? It's too restrictive, too many regulations. But as we are showing, these things are here so as to protect us. These are not here to make our lives miserable. These are here so as to make our lives better. And even in Matthew chapter 19, you have the apostles saying to Jesus, well, Jesus, if this is the case, that we cannot just get rid of our wives and marry another anytime that we want, what does Peter actually say about the situation? No, not quite. Yeah. It's in that same context. Peter ends up saying, well, Lord, if this is the case of the husband with his wife, then it's better for a man not to marry. You're putting this type of binding on the marriage relationship, that this is the only reason that we can get out. Then Peter says, well, I don't know anybody who want to get in. Well, that's the type of thinking that needs to go on when marriage starts coming into play. Is that if I'm seeing any type of situation to where, okay, I don't think I can make it with this person, then I don't need to get in it. Because once I'm in it, that's it. You're stuck with them. And you have to uphold your responsibility in that relationship. So as we said, over 50% are divorced, so we need to try to change what our stance is so as to reach them. No, we can't do that. God is the one who instituted the marriage relationship. Marriage is a heavenly ordained office. And God dictates and He manages what makes a marriage. And that is one man and one woman for life, leaving father and mother, and they are cleaving to one another. And the only way to get out of it is through fornication or some type of, or not some type, but unfaithfulness. But here's the change that is, in fact, needing to take place if we are going to help these people. If thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out. Cast it from thee, for it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. If thy right hand offend thee, cut it off. Cast it from thee, for it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body shall be cast into hell. So it starts with the eye, the looking, and then you have reference to the hand, action, taking that which is not yours to take. So as we said, just how serious is this? This is serious stuff. If you had to go to the doctor tomorrow and he said, you know what, you're going to lose your right eye, we've got to take your right eye. That's no laughing matter. And again, it's going to be one of those situations where you would probably want to go home and think it over. Or even to the fact of losing a hand. I'm right hand dominant, so I cannot imagine having to go back through and learning everything all over again to use my left hand. But just as it is the case with any type of disease, if you have a disease in one of these things, well, then it's going to be better to lose one of these things and get rid of the disease instead of having the disease spread. And this is the type of mindset that's needing to take hold of all of us. It's all about sacrifice. What am I willing to give up for the sake of purity? What am I willing to lose? What member am I willing to cast out to have that member perish so that I do not lose myself in eternity? So which is better to lose? The thing which brings in these sensual desires and thus leads me into action that brings these things into view, or to lose the thing that allows it to enter into you? Okay, if it's my eyes that I'm needing to control, and I'm not able to control my eyes, where my eyes roam, then let me sacrifice those. And in the world in which we live, in which our eyes are able to feed on a multitude of sources, this is becoming more and more difficult for us to start maneuvering through in making sure that we're not allowing corruptible things to enter into our minds that then end up being produced into action. Murder comes from hatred. You don't let hatred in. The act of adultery, the act of unfaithfulness, comes by allowing certain things into the mind. Much of what the Bible calls sin, the world calls entertainment. And ends up being normalized. To where we start seeing certain things, and because we see it or we hear it or we read it all the time, and thus it just becomes a part of who we are. And it's becoming more and more prevalent to even in things that we're not necessarily even aware of, because we've always had them in our lives. And so even with this discussion about what's being presented about marriage, divorce, and remarriage, and the marriage relationship, what Jesus has been discussing has been a tradition of the Jews for thousands of years. And Jesus is coming along and he's shaking the apple cart. He's changing what they're comfortable with. When it comes to television, even radio. Confucius said, if you want to know the desires of a nation, listen to their music. and you just listen to our music, and what is our music all about? Half the time with modern music, you can't listen to it. And what's being promoted and what our nation is saying that, yeah, this is what we are growing towards. And especially like with this here, with laptops and phones and the internet. The reason why there's so much immaturity in our world today is because of what's being promoted through these means. I never would have thought that a person would be able to make a living by making YouTube videos. What is that doing for society? What is that actually producing? You're not producing anything. You're just sitting at home, you got somebody my age, like 33, and they're acting like a child. And they're being paid for it. And the next generation sees that, and that's their idea of adulthood. Is it any wonder that we're seeing the job shortage like we're seeing? Because nobody's actually wanting to do any type of work that actually produces anything. Let me just do this, and I can be a kid for the rest of my life. Whereas before all of this, everything was about bringing children into manhood or womanhood. And that's almost gone today. So we need to be careful. And I'm not saying, throw these things out, but we definitely need to be more on guard with what we're allowing to come in, because more and more impurity is constantly being pushed in front of us. You have the other side that is constantly trying to set lines. And they're lines that we can't cross. They're lines that we cannot uphold. To limit these things is going to be in the categorization of what Jesus is presenting about plucking out your eye. I am limiting my time as to what I'm allowing my eye to see, what I'm allowing my eye to view. So even with that, these things set an unrealistic view of what the world is. There are studies that are coming out just recently that the suicide rate amongst teenage girls during all the lockdowns and everything like that has skyrocketed. And they're tracing it back to these things. Because the young girls are seeing, all they're looking at is social media with these models and what their perception of beauty is, and that they're not going to reach that level. And not even realizing that the majority of those models, or what social media is viewing as being beauty, is not even real. It's all filters. And because of that, not limiting this and not protecting as to what we see, young girls are killing themselves. So it's not a situation where we just got to throw all of this out. But you got to be careful what you're looking at. And even when it comes to books, what we allow ourselves to read, reading is not as prevalent today as the rest of this is. But even when it comes to information that comes into our brains, that comes out as action. That comes out in words. And that was what was being presented in the last section about every idle word is going to be brought into judgment. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, from a historical standpoint, perfectly fine. But even with this, there are some, like we're saying, with how the world is and how that we are trying to set a righteousness that exceeds. That's what this is all about. We are trying to, in fact, go beyond and find an abundance of what it is that we are, trying to present to the world. When it comes to television and things that we just being described as entertainment, there are some things, there are, certain films, certain shows that Christians just do not need to watch. I will never watch Wolf of Wall Street. Over 700 curse words, and predominantly the F word, high drug use, drug content, and adult scenes. And that's what people are praising that film about, is that it is the film that has the most curse words in it. And some might even say, well, Micah, we know that you have a clear play. Even with clear play, that movie's not worth watching. And especially if it allows me to be able to present myself to somebody else out in the world. It's like, they ask me, have you seen this movie? No, I've never seen it. And why? Here's why. Even when it comes to, other films like Deadpool. I won't watch Deadpool because it's being praised as the first Marvel movie to have an R rating. As if that's something really worth praising. The curse words that are inside of that, and then the sexually explicit scenes that are in it as well. Even with the clear play, I'm sure the clear play could do a good job of filtering it, but it would be better for me to be able to say that, no, I've not seen it. And why is that? Because it comes back to this idea that we're trying to guard ourselves. And you see, that's the thing about it. Would we allow a person, a physical person, to come into our homes and use that type of language? No, we wouldn't. But we allow it all the time with TV. And it's one of those things to where, like I said, as the world continues to corrode and the world continues to corrupt, then it is a situation of where more and more we're having to rein ourselves in so as to be able to show a difference to people that are around us. And it's getting tougher just from the standpoint of like the homosexual movement, the transgender movement that's constantly being pushed on us. And it's, you see the entertainment system or society, and they're just going out of their way to corrupt things. Like just recently, I saw that somebody was trying to make a comic where I don't think it was Superman, but it's Superman's son, and he's bisexual. And it's just like, if you want it, why not make a new superhero? Why do you have to go in and try to corrupt Superman? Because that's what they want to do. For them to act like, no, we just want to be accepted and blah, blah, blah. No, what you're wanting to do is you're wanting to undermine our core beliefs. I mean, Superman is an all-American hero. And his catchphrase just left me. Something, something, the American way. Truth, justice, the American way. But you see, with them, they can't allow that to stand. Because truth, justice, the American way previously was, well, we recognize one man and one woman. And so as to bring this agenda in, what do we have to do? We have to start corrupting your fundamental elements. And it's coming to a point to where, like, we have We have people that want to go on boycotts for political reasons. Like there's a big to-do over Disney and The Mandalorian because they got rid of one of their actresses because she's a conservative. And so a lot of people were saying, well, don't watch The Mandalorian or get rid of Disney Plus, so on and so forth. And that's for political stuff. Well, what about taking stands for spiritual reasons? For purity, protecting our homes, protecting of our children. And as I'm saying, as more and more wickedness comes in, it's becoming harder and harder to do. But as we are being shown by Christ, it's a necessary thing. Necessary to lose your eye so as to be able to keep your soul. And being able to make these type of sacrifices. Jesus would say in Matthew chapter 15, verse 18, here's why this is important. Those things which proceed out of the mouth come forth from the heart, and they defile the man. So the Pharisees and Jews are all concerned about what's on the outside. But Jesus is showing, no, it's what comes from within a man that defiles him. For out of the heart, or the mind, proceed evil thoughts. From evil thoughts are produced murders. And it's from these same areas where we get adulteries and fornications. Thefts, false witness, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man. If these things come out of what I put in, then I need to be careful about what I put in. Proverbs chapter 23 and verse 7, we're told, for as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. So what is it that destroys marriages? Jesus has put the foundation right here. It's attitudes. Marriage is no longer viewed as being sacred. It's just something that society says this is what we do. We grow up, we get married, we buy a house, we have children, and leaving out the spiritual side of it. This is what God has dedicated as being a successful life. And then it's after this that Jesus deals with the divorce issue, or divorce and remarriage. But what we have being presented here as the importance to society, we can't be silent on these things. That just because this is what the world is doing, we can't just sit back and when we see it happening and just say, oh, well, that's terrible. That's unfortunate. What a shame. But we have to be the mouthpieces that are instructing. That instead of a person moving forward with divorce, it's just, well, how can we help you reconcile? To teach people how to have and how to be successful in their marriage. And if you teach them that, then you don't have to teach about the divorce part of it. That in fact, divorce is supposed to be a last resort and not the first option. And just notice how quickly Jesus deals with it, and we'll deal with it just as quickly. It hath been said, whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement. But I say unto you that whosoever shall put away his wife, saving for the cause of fornication, causeth her to commit adultery. And whosoever shall marry her that is divorced, committeth adultery. Here's a 2-verse answer. Now, how could Jesus answer so quickly, so easily? Because he's already gotten to the heart of the problem. And the problem is the heart. If your mind is in its proper setting and is practicing what the Beatitudes say, then this is all we have to say about divorce. It's only for the sake of fornication. But guess what? Don't have to worry about that. You fix the thoughts and you fix the attitudes of people, then you fix the divorce problem. Now, we'll save our discussion of Deuteronomy chapter 24, 1 through 4, for when we get to Matthew 19. because that's where all of the rebuttal is being brought up by the Pharisees. But even when we get back to, or when we go to Matthew 19, we're still going to be coming back here to Matthew 5, 31 and 32 for some explanation. And all of this is coming from as we are seeing already, is coming from a misrepresentation of Deuteronomy chapter 24. So when it mentions here, we will say this very briefly about it. But I say unto you that whosoever shall put, where is it? Here. It hath been said, whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement. This writing was not a fault-free divorce. Now, as we said, they're manipulating this to where it's just like anything that you want to put away your mate for, you can do it. But as we've already illustrated, or that we will further illustrate, we've mentioned it briefly, under the Old Testament system, you could not just do anything on your own accord. If you wanted a divorce, you had to go before the court. And you had to bring witnesses. So even with this, and you look at the restrictions that are being placed on this writing of divorcement, this writing of divorcement was designed so as to hold back the divorce process. Because in Deuteronomy chapter 24, 1 through 4, it's being said that, okay, you put away your wife, you give her the writing of divorcement, she can go and marry somebody else, but she can't go back to her previous mate. And that's done on purpose to show this isn't something that you just jump in and out of. If you're going away, you're staying away. But if you're going to stay, then you're going to stay. And we look at our society today, and we have men and women that are on their 4th, 5th divorces, and you just have to stop and ask yourself, or the people should stop and ask themselves, what's wrong with this person that they cannot stay married? And that's ultimately what you're being shown here. A woman that is continuously being put away and put away and put away and put away. That doesn't sound like a woman I want to be with. There's something wrong with her that nobody's wanting to hold on to her. The same thing with the mate, or the male, with the husband. Constantly being get rid of, thrown out, thrown out, thrown out. Why would I want to take that person in? But here's the other side of it. When we think about the Old Testament system, what was one punishment for adultery? Leviticus 20 and 10, Deuteronomy 22 and 22. You're stoned to death. Now, which would you rather have? Would you rather have this stoning, or would you rather have this writing of divorcement? This is a mercy way out, to where a person is going to recognize, okay, this person, this woman's being put away because of adultery. Why would I want to marry her? She wasn't faithful to her first husband. Why would she be faithful to me? And thus, you actually have Joseph taking in that same type of mentality in Matthew chapter 1 and verse 19. Then Joseph, her husband, being a just man, and notice this, and not willing to make her a public example. This one here, very public. But this one here, we can go before witnesses. And of course, with Mary, she's already showing that she's with child. It's not Joseph's. Joseph doesn't want to see her put to death. And so he's fine to put her away privily. Then okay, here's this writing of divorcement that puts you as innocent. And she goes with this letter showing that she was unfaithful. But yet how easy it would be for a society to manipulate that. To abuse God's mercy and to abuse God's grace in that situation. To where here's what he's doing so that we don't have to just go around. So just think about if we had this today. not this, but if we had this today, and that's all we had, there would be people lying in the streets all over. But instead, God said for them, well, you can also do this. And then because it's like the old saying, if you give an inch, people take a mile. And that's what the Jews started doing. They started taking this mercy and this grace that God is giving. They're just saying, well, let's just put writing of divorcements everywhere. That's not what God intended. And even for today, the binding of marriage is still the same. And if people would recognize what it is that Jesus is teaching here of the severity, the consequences of ruining a marriage, all right, I'm going to think seriously before I enter into it. And then when I'm in it, I'm going to remember, okay, that severity is still there. To where I will not only honor and protect my marriage, but when I see others that are going through trouble, I know what the consequences are. I know what severity is. And so what am I going to do? I'm not just going to stand back and watch a marriage go down in flames. I'm going to try to intervene and try to show them, you need to try to salvage this. And usually when you have a marriage falling apart, it's not just the fault of one person. When it comes to the marriage relationship, it's going to be an equal part of it falling apart. And too many times people want to say, well, he's not doing this, and then they want to turn around and say, well, she's not doing that. When the reality would be, listen, just behave how you're needing to behave, and everything will be fine. And even further showing the severity of this, 1 Peter chapter 3, in writing about wives needing to be subject unto their husbands, he takes it a step further when he mentions in verse 7 that husbands need to learn about their wives, grow with your wives in accordance with knowledge, and what's the consequence if you don't? Yeah. That if you are not going to protect your marriage, your prayer life is going to suffer. And so that's actually the context of 1 Peter 3:12 about his eyes are over the righteous and his ears are open to their prayers. That is said right after verse 7. What is a part of our righteousness that exceeds? We take care of our marriages. Husbands love their wives. Wives reverence their husbands. And they're growing together. They're protecting it because it's valuable and it's the only one that they have. And they keep back these influences that would come in to pollute it and to pervert it. So any questions there about the plucking out of an eye, guarding the eye, guarding our hearts, being salt that preserves a marriage? Thoughts, questions, comments? Nothing? Everybody good? All right. Then we will pause and go into our next one.